classic smear. This, you take a germ of truth, you distort it in order to turn it into something that it is.
Good evening, folks. Welcome to a Unite election contest Damo Meet special. It was Peter Mandelson there, said that the classic smear is to take a germ of truth and distort it to turn it into something that it isn't. My guest tonight has had much said about him, and with no subject matter off limits, we're going to get to the truth. Following Len McCluskey's formal announcement that he plans to retire as Unite General Secretary, the candidates vying to replace him have begun their campaigns, and one of those candidates joins me tonight. Howard Beckett is a Unite Assistant General Secretary for Politics and Legal. He also sits on the Labour Party National Executive Committee for Unite the Union, representing members' interests at Labour's top table. Much has been said about him in the press and across social media and by his opponents in this contest, and so I'll be putting those claims to him tonight, as well as taking questions from you, the audience. Welcome, Howard. Thank you for joining me tonight for a bit of a grilling, but take your time. It's great to be speaking to you once again. How are you? How is your campaign going?
I'm doing very good, thanks, Damo. The campaign is very exciting, and it's got loads of grassroots momentum behind it and loads of volunteers. The launch was exceptional and gave everybody a lift, including myself. So, no, I'm doing really well, Damo. I should just mention I'm also at AGS because I'll get hung, drawn and quartered. I'm also AGS for our CPPT sector, which is chemicals and textiles, our services sector, which includes hospitality, which is obviously under attack, and also for young members. So just not to leave them behind, Damo, with all the talk about legals and politics.
I'm glad you got that to say, because I don't know if I could get all that out, all those acronyms. Anyway, the first thing I want to deal with tonight is argue one of the toughest accusations levelled at you, and this is in connection to your being fined £5,000 back in 2009 in the miners' compensation scandal, that the law firm you were part of took money from payouts to miners that should not have happened. So in the interest of openness and transparency, there is no subject matter we won't cover tonight, and you have accepted that. And as such, I need to ask you, did you feed from the miners?
No, absolutely not, Damo. I presume you want to do this as a question and answer rather than me just giving a big long list of all of the lies that appear in the media. But that is the very first lie. I was never accused by the Solicitors Regulatory Authority of taking money from miners' compensation, profiting from miners' compensation, and nor did I ever do it.
No. Davey Hopper exonerated you himself over this, didn't he? What's the story behind that?
Well, listen, I will give a little bit of a story behind the miners, because I was never really tremendously involved in miners' compensation. I was very friendly through a trade union comrade with the Durham Miners Association and Davy Hall and a couple of his comrades, and in particular Jackie, who's still going, who's a wonderful man. And Davy Hopper contacted me and asked me at the very last minute, there was a limitations period approaching for these cases. They only had about a month to get over, and he had some housebound members who couldn't get out, couldn't get the solicitors. And he approached me to ask me if I would go and do house visits for these miners who were at the cusp of limitations, and I agreed to. But it was never anything of any major area for the law practice. It was only ever about 100 miners that we looked after. We looked after at the request of Davy Hopper. So whenever these lies first appeared in the press, which was all very well constructed in order to avoid any potential for defamation cases, which I'll come back to, Damo. But whenever these lies were first constructed in the right-wing media, it was raised at our Executive Council, and Davy Hopper very kindly wrote a letter to the Executive Council outlining how I came to look after miners, and obviously putting right the lie in respect of whether or not any of the miners' compensation had been taken by my practice at the time, which obviously it had not.
Thank you. It was last July that we first spoke to each other. We had our very first interviews with each other, as it happened. And you were at that time running for the United Left nomination for General Secretary in the, as it turns out, correct belief that Len McCluskey was going to step down. United Left is the left-wing group within Unite the Union. Their nomination is understandably one sought after by left-wing candidates. You failed to gain that nomination, albeit by something like 3 votes, yet you're still standing for General Secretary. Are you not just splitting the left vote by still standing? Why are you?
Well, firstly, Damo, I'm pretty insistent that I won that hustings. There were rules that were agreed beforehand. They were agreed in Len McCluskey's office, and those rules were not adhered to. And if those rules had been adhered to, it was very easy to see from the information that the United Left gave out, which was never supposed to have been given out, but they gave it out in a hurry to justify their own position. It was very clear that if the rules had been applied, I won the hustings by some distance, and that's before you even get into the issue as to whether or not there had been ballots that hadn't arrived with people who were likely to have been voting for me. There was never any allegations from Steve's side that any of his people didn't get ballots. But in any event, you could see from the clear information that the United Left put out that on any application of the rules, I won the hustings. Now, I offered at that time to have that independently adjudicated. I offered to have it rerun, and both of those were rejected. The United Left forced it through in a matter of days, 72 hours, to try and get an NCC that has never been re-elected. There hasn't been an AGM to re-elect the NCC. Forced it through in an attempt to remove me from the race. And obviously, I discussed this with colleagues and people who had supported me, and I was persuaded, because we had won the hustings, that I should stay in it. Now, whenever it gets on to the issue in respect of whether or not we are splitting the left vote as a consequence of that, well, the first process that we have in the Unite General Secretary election is to get enough branch nominations to get on the ballot paper. And there's a very, very powerful argument for the fact that in that there are 3 candidates who are running who describe themselves as being of the left, that doesn't leave any room for the right wing to get enough branches to get onto the ballot paper. You need 174 branches to get onto the ballot paper. So I don't believe that there will be a right wing candidate on this ballot paper, certainly not the right-wing candidate who's mostly talked about in the media. And as a consequence, I believe that there will be an opportunity for the 3 candidates who describe themselves in the fashion that I referenced to fight it out with the Unite electorate.
Should that right-wing candidate get on, however, would there be a discussion about whether only one left-wing candidate would run? Because obviously we've seen what's happened recently in the Unison election process and how the left vote got split there. Is there a risk of these so-called left-wing candidates, these 3 who claim to be left-wing, splitting the left-wing vote? Should a right-wing candidate get on that ballot?
Well, Damo, I sort of like, I need to be careful not to understate the prospects or overstate the prospects of the right-wing candidate getting on the ballot paper. He won't. There is the threshold of 174 branches, 5%, was brought in by Rules Conference after the last General Secretary election. And I don't believe that the right wing will get anywhere near that. If the right wing got onto the ballot paper, you could knock me over with a feather. I'd be that surprised. I just cannot see any prospect whatsoever of it happening. But if it did happen with some extraordinary course of events, then obviously the 3 candidates who described themselves as the left would have to sit down and discuss it in order to make sure that the left vote was not split and the union did not go into the right hands of the hard right wing. And I'll give this assurance to everybody all through this process: this union will not end up in the hands of the hard right wing. It will be a left candidate who will be General Secretary going forward.
One thing that's been picked up in the media and is often remarked upon, storylines, headlines, referring to furious speech by Howard Beckett, angry Howard Beckett. Your temperament has been criticised by opponents, praised by others as showing passion. You've been called a dork even by some because you're a former chess champion. Are you an angry person, Howard? Are your critics right that this makes you a liability?
Damo, it's impossible not to be angry with society at the moment, surely. Like anybody who is anything other than angry with society should probably have a look at themselves. We've got over 150,000 people who have died as a consequence of COVID. We have a government that has taken decisions that have cost tens of thousands of lives. The majority of those are working class people. COVID hasn't created the inequalities of society, but it certainly exposed the inequalities of society. And then all through this, we have a Labour leadership that has committed a dereliction of duty, really, insofar as they failed to provide an opposition, failed to provide a voice for the most vulnerable of society, failed to provide an alternative built on hope and wealth taxes and speaking for working class people. So, Yes, I think the description of me being angry is a justified description. I am angry. Does that mean that I don't operate with clarity of thought? Then that I would absolutely reject, Damo. I think I operate well whenever I'm angry, and yes, it becomes passionate whenever I'm giving speeches, and there certainly are times whenever others have heard my anger in close proximity, but I don't think it's ever affected my judgment, and it's not my only emotion, that's for sure. I do have empathy and love and affection, and I do have a great deal of hope for the future. So it's not my only emotion, but it's certainly one that I'm very aware of because of the injustices that exist in society at the moment.
Well, obviously we're conscious here about how the media will necessarily portray passion, should we call it, rather than anger. But however people view it, it's clearly it's something they picked up on in your nature. Does it, what built up this passion in you? Where does this anger, this frustration? Okay, obviously we've got issues with Keir Starmer now, and I'll come to that presently. But is there a moment, or is it something to do with your past, your history, your upbringing? Where does the anger come from? Is there more to what made you brought you to this point, shall we say?
Certainly part of it, Damo, will be my background. It's very difficult to talk about your background in an awful lot of detail. I don't really enjoy talking about it, because in that sense, I suppose I'm quite a private person, but I've accepted that whenever you put your name forward to be a candidate for the privilege of being a General Secretary of Unite, for example, you have to talk about your background. And there's no doubt I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. My parents didn't believe in religion for education, and as a consequence I went to what's best described as a mixed religious school, a state school, but it was one that was 95, 96, 98% Protestant, and I was a Catholic, and I experienced sectarianism every day of my life for certainly 3 or 4 years during that school time. And obviously you saw atrocities go on in Northern Ireland on a regular basis. So yes, I can imagine that a large part of my anger is our passion, our anger and injustice is built from my childhood. But Damo, if you fast forward and, a few years back, people talk about the miners. For example, a few years back, I was asked and given the privilege to speak at the Durham Miners Gala. That's how much of a lie it is, any idea that I would ever have contemplated or ever did take money off miners' compensation. I was given the opportunity to speak at the gala, which is the event, obviously, for trade unionism, the opportunity for tens of thousands of people to show solidarity and a belief in collectivism. And I spoke then about the fact that there should be rage in society right now. Those who are retired should rage at the fact that they're trying to sell off the NHS and return us to a society of the 1930s. Those who are young should rage about the fact that they're being shackled with debt and given no future. And those who are parents should rage at the fact that they are being asked to work in zero-hour contracts, and rage at the fact that they've got insecurity of employment. There should be a rage at the moment in society. What should happen then is that rage should be focused, and it should be challenged through the trade union movement. I firmly believe that it is the trade union movement and collectivism that can change society, and people should learn how to channel their anger and their rage into being part of the collective, being part of a trade union, fighting back, withdrawing your labour where you need to withdraw your labour, but firmly believing that you can create a different tomorrow than yesterday.
Got some questions coming into the comments, which I'm always glad to see. First one I'm going to come to is, as a member involved in training Unite reps, do you support trade union reps having professional tutoring?
Oh, yes, absolutely. This is another one of the smears that I've heard recently, Damo, this idea. I remember going down actually to speak to education tutors and talking about education. If you believe that if you think about the union as being a wheel, talking about education being the core of that wheel and everything else going out as a spoke, we have to have education at the top standard within Unite. And obviously we need education working in conjunction with other departments. The big thing for me is that the departments must not work within silos. They must work together education, with political, with industrial, finding our champions of our workplaces and our champions of the communities. Whenever you've been in an industrial dispute, that those who are in the dispute immediately go into our political schools and understand that they fell into dispute because of the society that we live in, and then a constant education of our reps. So as members can go on this journey from being an activist to being a rep, to being an officer, or to be a rep in a wider field to represent us politically, the reality for all of us is that we need education at the core of us. And I'm very much an advocate. I heard recently a smear that if Howard was General Secretary, he would do away with the education department. I can tell you right here and now, nothing is further away from the truth. Education is at the absolute centre of everything we do as a trade union, and we have to be more ambitious about doing more education. And it's the reason why, as and when I publish my manifesto, Damo, you'll see a commitment in there for the union to grow its relationship with Show Racism the Red Card and make sure that anti-racism education is part of everything that we do with our reps and our members.
Well, the questionnaire has just popped up saying, thank you, I support. So that's one more positive comment. There's a lot of positive comments coming up, actually, with this. People clearly have an appreciation of what you're actually doing here tonight. I'm going to come to another viewer question here. If you win, will you encourage a switch to proportional representation for the General Secretary election instead of first past the post? And will you organise the fight against local government budget cuts, whatever they are and wherever they come from?
Well, it's pretty easy whenever you're given an answer yes to this. Just to deal firstly with your point, Damo, about dealing with the smears tonight, before I come on to answering that question, which is a very important question. I did start off this campaign intending to try and outstrip negativity with nothing but positivity, talk with enthusiasm and a commitment about how the union now can modernise and step forward in order to make sure that we can deal with precarious workplaces, in order to keep the role that we have played in society for the last 15 years, to make sure that the union maintains its reputation as placing fear into the establishment and fear into the right-wing media. That was my intention all the way through. But I suppose at a certain moment in time, you decide there's too many lies. People deserve, including your supporters, to hear me say that they're lies. And if people have any questions at all over those lies, I'll answer them, including why it was that the SRA gave me a fine, because it wasn't to do with the miners. But to deal with those two questions, Damo, that have been asked, proportional representation, I'm an advocate for proportional representation generally, not just within the Unite elections. Now, a lot of people say to me that that's a false premise, that proportional representation is not a class issue. I don't say that proportional representation is a panacea, some Pandora's box, is going to change the world, but I do think it is part of a solution, part of the solution that we need to find. And I do say to those who say it is not a class issue, that it is first past the post that has allowed Labour to move away from its class. It is first past the post that meant that we, frankly, at times could have put the television symbol that is above your left shoulder into a constituency and got Labour votes on the back of it. And as a consequence of that, those people who have not represented Labour values have stepped forward to being MPs, and Labour has stopped listening to communities. It's done it in Scotland, it's done it in the north of England, done it in the Midlands. And this is part of the solution, along with changing the age of voting, along with the abolition of the House of Lords, and for me personally, along with the abolition of private education. I think that private education drives the class divide in this country like no other. So I am definitely 100% an advocate for proportional representation, and that would include within the Unite elections. Obviously, I can only take the argument to the Unite members and hope to win it. I myself don't have that decision. In respect of local authorities, there is another issue that I would take to our local authority, NISC. I would ask them to pass declarations about those local authorities that impose cuts whenever they have reserves. I'm hearing of Labour authorities that have £1.7 billion in reserves and have not started any programme for the building of council housing. So I would advocate that for Labour councils, we now need to stand up and say that we ask much more of them than simply passing on the Tory cuts, that they have to look to their reserves and they have to look to alternatives.
The positive comments keep on coming. Just as a short interlude, obviously there's a lot of work to do with to get involved with the campaigning for the Unite General Secretary, and to back your campaign. If people want to sign up and get involved with your campaign, they can do so at beckett4unite.co.uk/get-involved. Next question I'm going to come to is, unlike some of your opponents, you have never been a Unite rep in the workplace. Although you've been a member for 20 years, you came into working for Unite in 2011 as a legal director, and you've worked your way up from there. And the question has been raised that your connection to members from more typical working class trades, shall we say, from people on the shop floor, has been questioned. And it's a valid question, I suppose. How do you think you connect to ordinary workers when, for many people looking at your candidacy, your background, you've not been one, or connect to the working class on the whole when, as a lawyer, you don't come across as working class yourself?
Well, listen, it's a very valid question to ask whether or not being a rep is a disadvantage to you. Not being a rep is a disadvantage to you whenever you ask the membership to vote for you for being General Secretary. It's most definitely a valid question because of the role that reps play in Unite the Union. They are the first port of call for our members. They put themselves at the sharp end. They're the ones that are victimised by employers. They're the ones that have to constantly deal with the members in the most difficult of circumstances. So it's undoubtedly a valid question. It's not a valid statement to say a solicitor or someone who has been a solicitor should not be General Secretary of Unite. Solicitors are a group of workers like any other group of workers. Some of them will come from working class backgrounds and some of them will not come from working class backgrounds. I know the background I came from, Damo. You know, my mother was a district nurse and a shop steward rep. She came from the south of Ireland. She left the south of Ireland as a very, very young woman to go to London to train as a nurse. Then met my father, who was with the civil service at the time, and they went back to Northern Ireland in 1969, the year that the Troubles started. My father reminded me recently that he never lost an election as a trade union rep. He was successful all the time, and he's expecting me to continue that family trait in respect of it. So obviously, I grew up in a trade union family. I grew up with the ethics that I still have now. I grew up at a time of tremendous trouble. Northern Ireland politics didn't offer a home for those who believed in collectivism, such as myself, but the trade union movement did. Transport and General Workers Union was right at the centre of the civil rights movement in Northern Ireland, and it gave me a great deal of comfort to know that there was a collectivism out there that was offering an alternative society to the sectarian divide that politicians were preaching. And then fast forward, Damo, obviously I was fortunate enough to get A levels and get to university. I pushed myself through law, much because of my grandfather's previous passion for law, who was from London, and he spent many a time sitting in the stalls in the Royal Courts of Justice, just watching events unfold. And then obviously whenever I went into practice, it was as a trade union lawyer, and then on to be legal director of Unite. And in the past 10 years, obviously, I've been at the forefront of many battles on behalf of our members. I don't think, Damo, that you would find many reps in Unite who do not know that I understand what goes on in the sharp end. I don't think you'll find many reps who would say other than if you called Howard Beckett, he will give you support in your darkest of hours. I think most reps know that I will always stand up and always step forward for them. I think most reps know that they can come to me on the most difficult of issues. I think most reps would say that I understand intimately the workplace. I am the legal director who has been responsible for ensuring that there's not been one single repudiation of official or unofficial industrial action that's been taken by Unite. I am the person who led on Vistian. I am the person who led on Blacklisting. I am the person who led on 2 Birmingham Bins disputes. I am the person who led in respect of INEOS whenever we were fighting to get ourselves recognised there again. And I am the person who's led constantly in respect of British Airways, so the most high profile and most difficult of employers. And I think the reps in all of those places will say to you that my representation has been one where I've clearly understood the issues that have been happening in their workplaces.
Of course, we've got a little bit of video footage of you on the picket line there, just playing while you were speaking just then. Obviously, you know, it's very difficult to argue against somebody who's been raised by parents who are both reps, that they don't actually know what they're talking about, or what can have a connection to shop floor well, as I've described them, working class tradesmen, shall we, or people from that sort of a trade. And you're right. I mean, lawyers are a job too. Teachers are a job. They're not necessarily seen perhaps as working class jobs. Perhaps they're seen as middle class jobs. But they're still workers. They still deserve representation, as you say. And one of the biggest things you've been leading on at the moment has been fire and rehire. Can you tell us a little bit about your work there?
Yeah, and it's the official launch tomorrow in respect of our official campaign for the banning of fire and rehire. So this is the disgraceful practice that's going up and down our nations at the moment, Damo, is in every single sector in our nations where opportunistic employers are taking advantage of the pandemic to take the opportunity of dismissing people and then re-employing them on dramatically reduced terms and conditions. And as I say, it's happening everywhere. But Unite is defeating it, Damo, where it's raising its ugly head. We defeated it in British Airways, albeit that British Airways was concessionary bargaining at the end, but we did defeat fire and rehire, and it was variations of contracts and then the creation of a pool of workers who'll be the first to go to whenever it comes to the time of re-employing people whenever we're through this pandemic. We beat it at Seco up in Scotland last week. We beat it at SPS Technology in the East Midlands. So we are fighting it everywhere, but it is an outrageous practice. It should be banned. The idea that in this time of pandemic, whenever it's workers who will rebuild our nations, that workers are actually being expected to pay for this crisis in the same way as they did in 2008 with reduced terms and conditions, should be rejected by all of us out of hand. But it's up to us now in Unite to give it the profile that it needs. So, you know, for those watching, I will be getting interviewed tomorrow. I'm on the Today programme on Radio 4, Damo, I'm afraid mainstream media, but at 6:15 in the morning for my sins. And then I'll be doing LBC later on. I'll be down at the Good Lord picket line, which you showed in one of the clips, which is an outstanding group of young workers who are their wages are being cut to the extent that they're going below the London living wage, and they're fighting back. And I'll be down at that picket line, and I'll be joined by others down at that picket line, including Jeremy Corbyn. So we are taking the fight to the employers in respect to this, Damo. And I suppose I'll finish with just this message that Unite is in a rude financial health. We have the sinews of war, as Lenin would say, and we have a strike fund of over £40 million. We're paying £70 a day in strike pay, and we are telling our members, take industrial action, fight back, do not accept this practice.
Yeah, and you happen to be around, and please do go down and join that picket line and support the workers, because it could be you tomorrow, ultimately. Now, you've been described variously as a chip off the Len McCluskey block, as hard left, intended in a negative sense, and you've been described as somebody more interested in the politics of the General Secretary role than perhaps what many see as the proper job of the General Secretary, which is to stand up for those workers. That video kind of refutes that somewhat, but your outspokenness regarding the actions of Labour under Keir Starmer have reinforced this. You've recently been described in that mainstream media, which you're going to tomorrow, as Keir Starmer's idea of a nightmare. What is your response to this criticism? Would you be a nightmare for Keir Starmer?
Well, yes. If he continues on his current path, then yes. Listen, politics. The reality of what we do within Unite is that politics feeds through everything in the same fashion as industrial feeds through everything, in the same fashion that education feeds through everything. The General Secretary has to be brave enough to talk about Unite's role as being a role for society, not simply a role that is defined to the workplace. Yes, we negotiate in workplaces and we do it very well, and we organise in workplaces and we do it very well. Any criticism of me that I am too political flies in the face of all of the list of disputes that I've just gone through with you, Damo. Vistian, the Blacklisting, Doncaster Stobarts, Ineos, British Airways, Birmingham Bins again. These are disputes of the highest level that I've led from the start until the finish, and I have finished them. I have not stepped in and stepped out. I have finished those disputes and stood by members through the darkest of hours in order to get to the other side. And I think most of those members would say to you that my involvement in those disputes has been to their benefit. But Unite is also a force for society. It is our responsibility to continue what Len McCluskey has created, that Unite is seen as this angst against the establishment, that we are seen as a bedrock of socialism that we continue to articulate for the most vulnerable in society. It's the reason why we created community membership. It's the reason why Len has continued to have arguments about where socialist agendas must move to, because we understand the role that Unite plays. Going back to traditional trade unionism, it's the reason why trade unions were the ones to organise their communities. The reason why the BNP were kicked out of Liverpool in the Northwest was because of the trade union movement. So to say that we are too political or too industrial, I think is defeatist. Unite can be everything. We are an industrial animal, we are an education animal, we are a community animal, and we are a political animal. What we must make sure happens is that everybody works together to achieve the future, to find our champions of sectors and of our nations, not step back from the political arena. So the challenge right here and now for the Labour leadership is one where they have to show their relevance to working class people. They need to constantly show that they are relevant every day, every week, every month, every year. Show that they are speaking for working class people, that they have the pulse of working class people, and that they understand what is needed in our communities and in our industries to rebuild. If Labour fails with that, then they fail. It won't be the trade union movement that will fail. We will step into the vacuum. Whenever Labour has failed in Scotland and stopped talking for people, working class people in Scotland, they left the vacuum that the SNP stepped into. That will not happen in the rest of the United Kingdom if I'm Unite's General Secretary. Where Labour fails, Unite will step in, because the reality for all of us is that politics is in our workplace, it's in our communities, it's in our society. It's the reason why we can have employers such as Jim Radcliffe and Ineos who can say swallow inflation to our workers. It's the reason why Birmingham Bins finds itself in perpetual dispute. It's the reason why employers think they can get away with fire and rehire. It's because of the society we live in, the greed of society that we live in. And it's for Unite to be the voice of working class people, to say that there is a different way, and that is a way of socialism and collectivism. And if we go down that path, then the future for the next generations will be much better than the present that we are going through.
I'm just getting some feedback here that apparently the impression is being created tonight that you are at arm's length from Fire and Rehire. Can I ask you point blank, who is leading on Fire and Rehire, please?
I am leading on Fire and Rehire, Damo.
You're leading on it. Thank you. We're going to go for some more viewers' questions here. I have a question that Unite in England has been left-wing, but Wales more right-wing, from full-time officers to lay officials. How will you address this? And do you agree with Andy Burnham that Labour should be more politically active in Northern Ireland?
Well, how I'll address it is everything that I said previously, that we cannot have departments working in silos. Departments have to work together. One of the first things that I will do, Damo, is if I tell you a short story before we get to Northern Ireland, actually, of Joe Passafield, who is the convener at Harland and Wolff in Northern Ireland, who said to me that he did not realise until he was in dispute that he is a socialist. And therein lies the relationship between industrial action and politicising of people. It's our responsibility to make sure that we get our members who are involved in industrial actions, and we politicise those members so as they understand why it is that employers think they can get away with 0-hour contracts, why it is that employers think that they can slash your terms and conditions. It is because of the neoliberal society we live in, and Unite's role is to fight back in respect of that. Now, always you will have within the structures of Unite, and I believe in regional structures, I believe in decentralisation, I believe in the role of the nations, you will always have certain areas that will move at a different pace than other areas within Unite. And it is true that will happen around our regions and our nations. But I can assure you that Unite Wales is now in the hands of a regional secretary who is a left-wing regional secretary, who is making sure that Unite is punching our weight in the political arena, is making sure that Unite's voice is being heard by Mark Drakeford, and is making sure that our policies are the policies that are being pushed in this election coming up. In reference to Northern Ireland and the role of Labour in Northern Ireland, I think really within Northern Ireland, Damo, if I'm being honest, that the union has a much bigger responsibility now to step forward and start talking about a party of workers in Northern Ireland. I firmly believe that the time has come now for us to accept that the sectarian divides of Northern Ireland cannot continue, that there isn't one party that speaks for both communities. And if Labour's determined not to get involved in it, then Unite needs to step forward now and take the argument there. I was hopeful in the last general election that I had persuaded a couple of our members to stand for Parliament. But unfortunately, certain commentaries that were made to them in their communities, they backed down from it. But they had a willingness to stand in assembly elections. And I firmly believe now that there is an opportunity for us to debate this in Northern Ireland and try and move to a situation where the Union is creating a party for members to stand for political positions.
Yeah. Another viewer question I've got: does Howard support investigation into possible collusion by full-time officers in the blacklisting of workers? From Terry Bruff there.
Yes, I do, but so does the current executive, Damo. I think sometimes these things get confused. The executive has already given authority for this investigation. It is underway. It has been carried out by a council, a Queen's Council, out of Old Square Chambers. And the delay in respect of it has only been a delay because we need permission of the court to use the papers that were used in the blacklisting litigation. We need the permission of the court to use those papers for this investigation. So there is an investigation underway. I fully support that investigation, and we'll see what conclusions it brings. But what I would say in respect of Terry's question, I would say this to Terry, that Terry, if there are individuals who've been involved in blacklisting individuals who work for trade unions, then they will be outed. If they are ex-officials, then we will see what we can do with them because they're ex-officials. If there was any current officials, then they would end up being dismissed by Unite. But do not let this narrative do anything to take away from the fact that it has been construction companies on an industrial scale who have used blacklisting to stop the employment of construction members of Unite. This is a sin of the construction companies, and in particular, a sin of Callum McAlpine, who was the architect and the godfather of the blacklist. And we must never allow any other narrative to be presented other than the fact that it is construction companies who created the blacklist and damaged and ruined the lives of Unite members as a consequence.
We've spoken a little bit about your upbringing now and how you became involved in trade unionism, raised in it essentially. I'd encourage people to also watch the first interview that we did together, because there's a lot more on there. But it's an oft-used criticism that when somebody has done well in life, they become a little bit detached. And we've seen press coverage alleging to your wealth quite often. One of the mainstream newspapers have run a story recently stating you have a property empire with properties worth more than £500,000 apiece, that you may have made a lot of money from the sale of your former solicitor's practice. You often get portrayed as this wealthy champagne socialist type in such media, not media we on the left particularly trust. But the question has been raised that if indeed you are a man of significant means, how can you relate to and be representative of a union filled with people with very limited, very uncertain means? I mean, as an assistant general secretary, you must have a hefty pension pot as well. If you have a number of properties, are you a landlord renting any of them out? Does this make your calls for a wealth tax from Labour, which they resisted, somewhat hypocritical? And would you apply a wealth tax like that to yourself?
Well, Damo, the first thing is, dealing with the issue of wealth. It is true that my practice was successful. It's not true that my practice was successful to the extent that it didn't deal with the working class issues of the day. I started that practice 14 years before I sold it. It was a practice that was premised in communities. It did work, pro bono work for those communities, in particular the Leaso Estate, where I started actually a radio channel in order to be able to give advice to the residents of Leaso Estate. I have an office at the Casa in Liverpool, which is the home of the sacked Liverpool Dockers, where again I did welfare benefits advice and other pro bono work. Whenever the Welfare Benefits Centre was shut in Wallasey, I was asked if I would open those services on a pro bono basis in my practice in order to service the people of Wallasey who otherwise simply would not have had access to welfare benefits. And I did that, and I'm pleased to say that that continues to this day under those who purchased the practice. So it is a truth to say that the practice was successful. You do value these things in monetary terms, but it is not a truth to say that I was driven by money. I was driven by competition, I have to say. I find myself to be a competitive individual, and for that reason was always driving to make my practice successful, but it wasn't one that was driven by money. And what I would say to people in respect of this, Damo, is that first of all, if I was in this for money, I wouldn't have come into the trade union. The reason as to why I sold the practice was because I wanted to take that next step forward to representing people. And my passion for the trade union is not driven by wealth. It is true that we are very fortunate as officials within Unite to receive very good packages, and those who have been in the longest will have very, very good pension funds. But it is not my drive. And I would like to ask people to judge my practice, my career, by probably this standard. I must have employed during my time as in private practice in the region of 500 or 600 people in totality. It grew into decent business. Nobody ever gave me anything. I grew it by way of taking out a bank loan and then grew it. But I would ask people to judge me in this standard that all through the time that I had that practice, including the 2008 financial crash, I never issued one single redundancy notice to an employee, and I never had one single case taken to an employment tribunal or commenced in an employment tribunal. I was, I feel, a good employer of people. I drove standards in that practice, but for the good of the wider community. And with that success, obviously, did come financial rewards, but it wasn't the driving factor.
Right, back to the audience. Question here: will Howard affiliate Unite with Peace and Justice Project?
Oh yes, well that's an easy one. Yes, I certainly would ask the executive to do so. Absolutely, the Peace and Justice Project is doing some tremendous work at the moment, and I've been fortunate enough to be involved with them in respect of a number of areas. And really, you're seeing the growth of something now that could be existential. It really is talking for wider society, and obviously, because of Jeremy's own background, international links, and to see the people who are contributing to it is absolutely fantastic. It really is. The standard of the people who are contributing to it is a reflection of the fact that we do have worldwide socialist networks, and we do have some of the brainiest people in the world to call upon whenever it comes to talking about alternative strategies for dealing with the ills of society. So yes, is the short answer to that question.
Communicating with 1 million plus members is vital to undermine neoliberal narrative, writes an audience member. All I get from Unite is annual membership card letter. How will Howard Beckett improve communication with members?
Well, the most significant thing is that I will be starting a television channel, Damo. I think it was ridiculed whenever I first said this. I've said it previously of Unite's wealth. Unite has a rude wealth. It's grown to a wealth of over £500 million on its balance sheet. I'm sure that frightens the establishment. There's £140 million in cash assets, £40 million in a strike fund. We now need to be brave and ambitious about everything that we do. I firmly believe that the message of collectivism is one that young people will want to sign up to. If they understand the trade union movement, they will want to be part of the trade union movement. We are being hamstrung by mainstream media, and we need to now create our own methods to talk, not just to our own members, but to wider society. And that, for me, is a television channel. It is a television channel through YouTube, fully resourced, constantly putting out programs, studios in every region and every nation, finding our champions, covering our disputes, sharing our experiences across sectors and across nations, and giving people the confidence to understand the power of collectivism. If we can give people the confidence to understand the power of collectivism, the power of their own labour, the power of Unite within society, then we can change the world. We can change the world from the ground up. We can change it organically, because people will come to the reality of the fact that it is collectivism that is the only option for tomorrow.
Will Howard consider reducing Labour Party monies even further?
If I'm seeming a little bit distracted at times, Damo, is because I'm watching the comments come through as we're discussing it. There's some great comments coming through as now. I'm trying to do two things at once, so my apologies. But just on that last question, Damo, because I should have referenced this also, the world of work is changing. We're seeing now the precarious working practices that are in. bogus self-employed, 0-hour contracts. We know all of the experiences that are out there, and Unite needs to now adapt and modernise in order that we can attract the precarious workers into Unite and get them to also understand collectivism. And that's about creating apps. It's about giving immediate advice to people. It's about ensuring that they have access to the information that they need. And all of that will be absolutely the first agenda in the first 100 days to make sure that we now move Unite to that modern union where we know that we can connect with people. And I'll just give this one example for those who are saying whether or not that's possible. It's an example I've used on many occasions, and it is the Baza branch down in Heathrow, where they had over 13,000 people at the height of Baza in their branch. These are people that didn't have a singular workplace. They never met for at least once every 4 years. They would have met on a flight, but they managed to keep 100% density. Why? Because they communicated with each other. They had forums. They had all of their webinar stuff to communicate clearly with each other, and they provided the service that was expected of them. So as soon as a member contacted those reps, they delivered on that service. And it's that micro that can become Unite's macro going forward. We don't have to have a workplace for people to believe in the collectivism. They can believe in collectivism and be part of Unite without being in exactly the same workplace. And Damo, in going back to that previous question, I've forgotten this question.
Well, I'm going to find it now. I just scrolled up. Yeah, here we go. I'll come back to it. We have another question, an industrial question, actually. This is just coming because we are running short of time, actually. In London, RATP is using divide and rule tactics across 3 subsidiary bus companies. Why is Unite dividing the strike action by setting 3 different dates across the 3 companies?
Well, I'm not involved in those industrial decisions. What I would say in respect of it is that I'm expecting there to be more and more strike action. What is missing all too often from this debate is public ownership as well. But you're seeing in London buses right now what's going on in our care sectors, in our NHS and in our housing sector. And that is that whenever contracts are moved, the only way for the new contract provider to make money is to reduce the terms and conditions of the workers. And that's why we have to stand up and bring together, they should all be organised together, but bring members together to take strategic industrial action now. And we have to open up the debate about public ownership. And this debate about public ownership, Damo, is going to become vital in the green industrial revolution. Who is going to own the green industrial revolution? Because if it's the same characters that have owned the previous industrial revolution, then it'll do us all no good whatsoever. So Unite has to be at the forefront of all of these arguments going forward.
There is one question I've determined I'm going to get shoehorned in because it's something we discussed ourselves almost a year ago, and when we spoke about the Unite community membership. What a fantastic offer it is, in that it means that whether you're in work or out of work for whatever reason, whatever your circumstances, there is a union in Unite that will represent you, that will stand up for you. There's a place for you in Unite. You spoke to me then about expanding Unite community membership further, that everyone should belong in a union, that there has been talk from some of your opponents since that actually you want to scrap it now. Now, you've refuted this yesterday via the Squawk Box. For anyone who hasn't read that article and seen the short video clip you made, I'm not sure if we've got it here to show or not. But
here in the third sector, we need to stand up.
Are you still committed to not only keeping but expanding Unite community membership, as you previously told me?
Absolutely, Damo. I think, my message to those who are standing against me is stand on your own platforms rather than make up my platform. The harsh reality for people is they can't have their cake and eat it. They can't say on the one hand, he's not industrial. Look, he wants the union to play this wider role in society. He wants to represent all of the most vulnerable people in society. And then on the other hand, say he wants an end to community membership. I've never heard so much nonsense. Community membership needs to be expanded because it's everything that I'm talking about Unite's role in society. There are differences between the candidates now, the 3 candidates as I refer to. There are differences in respect of our narrative. And I am best described as the person who believes in Unite Unite's role in society, wider society, as well as the workplace. I'm best described as a person who will say that Unite is big enough, powerful enough, and influential enough to do everything that we do, and not to talk in terms as if doing one aspect is at the expense of doing another aspect. Community membership will grow if I am General Secretary of Unite. And I'll say this also, Damo, going forward, that I will be putting things into my manifesto, commitments to the community members, not just about the growth of that membership, but also about their role within Unite, because I don't want to see any second-class citizens as far as Unite membership is concerned. Unite members are Unite members, and their voice needs to be heard. And I will also be expanding on the offer for community members and commitments to community members, so as we are representing the most vulnerable in society.
I mean, we've got that clip here to play now as it happens. It's playing on mute. Have we got sound for that?
Unemployed in this country. Nobody should not be in a trade union.
I've always supported community. In fact, I was one of those who advocated for it before it was launched. Hi, it's Howard Beckett here, Assistant General Secretary of Unite. I've just read the Squawk Box article. It seems there's no end to the smears. I'm hearing it all. If it's not about me personally, if it's not about my life before I was in the trade union, I've heard this rumour that I'm going to do in education, and now a completely outrageous lie that I have some agenda to stop community. The truth could not be further from the mark. I've always supported community. In fact, I was one of those who advocated for it before it was launched. I developed the package for community membership. I've always talked about the fact that we need more people in the union from the cradle to the grave. We need to be ambitious about how we attract people into the union. And I've always said on the record that Unite is about its role in society as well as the role in the workplace. As important as the workplace is, we all know that Unite has a responsibility to speak for the most vulnerable in society. That's the role that we've taken on over the last 12 years, and I support it completely. So no, whenever I launch my manifesto, you'll see policies in there that are intended to help community membership, drive up the membership, and to reflect the fact that I understand the issues that they're going through in their own societies, and I'm determined that Unite will take on those issues. So thank you. It's another smear. Please ignore it. Put the record straight. Beckett backs community.
Howard Beckett, you agreed this interview in order to address the stories, smears, tall tales, whatever people might care to call them, that have been said and written about you. You knew this wouldn't be necessarily an easy evening, but you were prepared to face it anyway and answer whatever I threw at you. So thank you for your forthrightness tonight and covering these issues, and indeed answering the questions of tonight's audience, which I'm sure they very much appreciate. You've shown yourself willing to take on any accusation, and by agreeing to no subject being off limits, you've shown you're content to be held fully accountable for your actions, something all leaders should agree to do, yet so often they do not. In the meantime, may I wish you well with your continued campaign. Thank you once again for speaking to me so candidly tonight.
Thank you, Damo. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.